So on the one hand, we have an increase in the numbers of racialized people in urban centers in Canada. On the other hand, we have this experience of disproportionate exposure to low income. The question, of course, is what that means in terms of both how we live together, but also in terms of public policy. For us to get a better sense as to how this problem is very particular, I think we need to use an anti-racism analysis. Because to start with, I would argue that that poverty is a structural problem in Canadian society. There's a reason why, after the Parliament of Canada in 1989 made a commitment to ending child poverty by the year 2000, and every political party signed on, right? It wasn't just the New Democrats. The New Democrats brought the motion forward. But the Liberals and the Conservatives all signed on. And this was under a conservative government. There was a consensus that Canada was too rich and its values too clear for us not to be able to end child poverty. But by the time we got to the year 2000, we had made minimal progress. Minimal progress. So there's a reason why that is the case. And I want to suggest to you the reason why that is the case is because poverty is a structural problem. That you cannot maintain the economy as it is and expect to make significant progress. Something has to give. Something has to change. In fact, I would suggest that we actually have lost ground partly because the economy has shifted in a direction of creating more poverty. There was a time when Mike Harris told us that to end poverty, all we had to do was tell people to get off their backside and go and work. Remember that? Were people around by then? People born by then? We're coming from the 80s now to the 90s. Hopefully at some point I'll figure out when people were born. But in any case, that was Mike Harrison's position. That was the position of the right wing in Canada. Too many people on social assistance. And the way to end that, or to limit or to lower those numbers, by kicking people off of social assistance, getting them to go out and get a job. Mike Harris took the $37 that they used to give, it was a prenatal allowance that they used to give low-income women, $37 a month. He took that away because he claimed that those women were taking the money and buying cigarettes and booze instead of looking after their kids. But in essence, he argued that they were harming their babies by, that the government was participating in the harming of the babies by giving $37 extra, right? So that was the argument then. But clearly now we can establish that the problem is not people refusing to work. It's not women just sitting at home and having babies. I mean, this is all uncomfortable talk, but you know we have to have this talk. You know, because in 1995, an overwhelming majority of people voted for Mike Harris because they bought his story. They did. So what did he do when he came into power? He did what he said he would do. He cut social assistance by 22%. And he cut the numbers of people on social assistance significantly. Did that end poverty? It did. Poverty persisted and in fact increased. Today, 38% of the people who are poor in Ontario are working poor. So we've moved them off of social assistance into the labor market, but at such a low level of compensation that they're still in poverty. Why is that significant? It is significant because a lot of the working poor are people who come from traditionally disadvantaged groups. A lot of the working poor are women. A lot of the working poor are racialized people. A lot of the working poor are young people. A lot of the working poor are immigrants. And a lot of them, in some ways, have identities that intersect. They are women who are racialized and immigrants, some of them young. Right? So we need to get into these weeds if we are going to be serious about addressing issues of poverty. We need to get into the structural dimensions of these problems. So the gender hierarchies and the racial hierarchies that determine how people get access to work, how they are compensated, what type of work they get, are partly responsible for the experience of racialized poverty. Just to say that partly because of all of those experiences, I'm running a long time, racialized people are 2 to 3 times more likely to be poor than other Canadians. Right? What's the situation in Ontario? Urban Ontario. In 2001, racialized people represented about 22.8% of the urban population in Ontario and accounted for 39.4% of all poor households. 5 years later, and this is during a time when the economy seemed to be doing quite well, thank you. At least the media was reporting that the economy was doing exceptionally well. Canada, over the last 30 years, became the 9th largest economy in the world. And during that period of time, what's been happening with regard to poverty? In the 5-year period from 2001 to 2006, what do we have? The population of racialized people in urban centers rises to about 26.9%. Their proportion of poor people also grows up. Goes up significantly, such that they are almost 50% of the population of people who are poor. Right? So something is fundamentally wrong. The promise was that people would come from other countries with their qualifications. It is on the basis of those qualifications that we are recruiting them, we're providing them with a new place to start their lives, and that we would benefit from the fact that they had those qualifications. Our communities would be better off because we would have people who are well educated and well trained, who could do a whole variety of things. In fact, the motto that was being followed was that as long as people have quote unquote portable skills, they'll be fine. They'll be able to integrate into Canadian society without any difficulty. But that's not happening. A lot of those working poor are people who have a significant amount of education and experience. A lot of them are quite frustrated because of the experience that they face. And increasingly, we have what people have referred to as ethnic enclaves. These are places where you have a disproportionate number of the residents are from racialized groups, but there are also places where poverty is more likely to define the community than is the case in other parts of the city, right? Peel has a number of these. Many of you would know more of these, but I'll just give an example of Malton and Cooksville-Dixie in central Brampton, where the levels of poverty are generally higher than they are for other neighborhoods. But the other thing that distinguishes them is that they have high numbers of immigrants and high numbers of racialized people, right? So the intersection that I was talking about is becoming very clear in these communities. The section of race and immigration status and poverty. Okay. So what does that mean for those of us who are concerned about building communities, building neighborhoods, and then at the end of the day actually building a nation? What it means is that we have communities that are not defined by their promise, but are increasingly defined by a broken integration process and system. We have communities that are increasingly defined by social exclusion and marginalization, right? Communities that are increasingly powerless to intervene in community, in political processes, so that they can address some of the problems that they face. So communities for which the idea of liberal democracy really does not and cannot work because they're too disempowered to be able to raise the issues of concern that the political system is supposed to be able to address. And by the way, our political institutions reflect that very clearly. So, 50% of the people in Peel are racialized. What is the percentage of racialized people on any one of the city councils or the regional council? Anyone here have an answer? What is the percentage? In some councils, by the way, it doesn't even register because it is so low. But sorry. You know, we have a lot of work to do. An important dimension of the experience of poverty is this idea that people drop out of social life, the life of the community. They drop out of any serious and positive engagement with the institutions of the community, whether those are political institutions, social institutions, or cultural institutions. And increasingly, that is what we see in some of these communities. So I dare say we have a lot of work to do. And for me, this is not just about racialized populations. This is about the entire population. Because if you're going